Welcome to Grand's Rock Warehouse, and I want to welcome Paul Simon and Todd Evans to the show. Tonight, we are going to deconstruct the Men at Work catalog. We're going to look at those 3 studio albums. So without any further ado, let's get started.
He's in his basement, and he's worldwide. Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight we are going to take a look at the band Men at Work. Not too many people are talking about Men at Work, but they put out 3 albums. They formed in Melbourne, Australia in 1978. Look at these hits, kids. Down Under, Who Can It Be Now? Be Good Johnny, Overkill, It's a Mistake. They had a slew of hits. Well, until they had that 3rd album, which we're going to talk about that. So we've got these gentlemen here. We're going to look at that debut album from 1981, Business as Usual. These guys are considered, well, I would think they're new wave. What do you guys think? Are they a new wave band? They're right in that pocket. Some people may think that they're not, but I'm going to put them in new wave.
I think so. I was going to, well, I'll talk about that a little bit when I talk about the first album, but it's kind of a hybrid.
Kind of a hybrid.
Yeah.
But let's think about this. This came and hit the US with big time. I don't think there was any other Australian band that really hit the United States like Men at Work did back in 1981. Let me throw this out there before we throw it over to Todd, and then we'll go over to Paul. When this record came out, when I heard it, it was one of those records where I went, oh, well, that's kind of fresh and new. Was it really that new? I don't know. But compared to like what came before disco and all that, the pop singles charts, yeah, I was into the knack in 1979. But 1981, this was a breath of fresh air. So we're going to look at this record and we're going to look at all 3. Let me throw it over to Todd Evans and we'll go over to Paul and get his scoop on it. Todd, what's your thoughts on Business as Usual? And, you know, you and I were in the same era, so you know what it was like when it came out.
Yeah. So this came out at a time, this was before I worked in a record store. So the first person to tell me about this record was my sister. She saw the video for Who Can It Be Now? And she was like, there's this band and they don't sound like anybody else I've ever heard. And they've got this weird video where this weird guy's like sitting in a chair, and she was trying to describe it to me. And she was like, oh, I'm failing. I can't describe it. And so, you know, the album came out and I didn't buy it right away, but I had a friend that bought more records than I did, had more expendable income. Hi, Bill, if you're watching. But he bought it and he loved it. And so through him and playing it at, you know, parties and things like that, I got to know it really well. And then when I started working in the record store later that year, it was, you know, kind of all over the place and I could hear it all the time. But the thing about this record is that it doesn't, they might be one of the most original bands of the modern era. They might be one of the most original. I mean, they really didn't sound like anybody else. And it's kind of new wave. It's quirky enough to be new wave, but there's also this kind of mainstream element that's going on. And there's also like kind of a prog rock thing that's going on. So I'll talk about that as I kind of go through it. But I mean, I think it starts so strong with Who Can It Be Now? I Can See It in Your Eyes and Down Under. I think it's kind of a 1, 2, 3 punch of songs. But the thing about this album is I've heard reviewers say that they think that the first 2 Men at Work albums are really big hits and then a bunch of filler. I do not think this. And more this album than the other album. Cargo has some spots where it kind of veers in that direction. But every single one of these songs I think is really good. And the playing is really good. And ironically, the playing of the 2 guys that got sacked is really good and very distinctive. But if you're going to talk about distinctive playing, I think you have to talk about Ron Streicher, because this guy, he was like the person that I I compare him to the most is I think he's a lot like Andy Summers in his approach. And I think that there are a lot of things that sound kind of Andy Summers-esque, but I also think he has his own sound. I read somewhere that some people think that that's because he was the bass player and then switched to being the guitarist, so his guitar parts are kind of percussive, and that makes sense to me. I think that kind of does explain it. But some of these songs, they have such infectious energy, and they're so they're quirky, but in a way that they have a lot of energy and they have a lot of personality. And I'm looking at Helpless Automaton, and that's the one I'm thinking of. It's like super fast, and it's just great. And the sequencing of these first two albums is really good, I think. But by the time you get, I mean, everybody knows, the three songs that I mentioned, Who Can It Be Now? I Can See It in Your Eyes and Down Under, but Underground is a great song. People Just Love to Play with Words is another one of the songs. It wasn't a single, but people tend to know that song. And then Be Good John. But Touching the Untouchables and Catch a Star are both just absolutely incredible. And they've got the playing in them is it really I mean, I guess you'd call it art rock, but it really borders on prog. I mean, and especially in those two songs and Down by the Sea, which between Down by the Sea and No Sign of Yesterday, those are my two favorite tracks, and they kind of go like this. But Down by the Sea, the drumming on that song is almost, I mean, it's almost Bruford-esque. I mean, there are drum fills that are just so fast, and the attack at the end on the snare is so confident that you think, where did this guy come from? And I think a lot of people don't notice that so much because, they're just listening to the hits, and there's nothing wrong with that at all when the hits are so good. But the deep tracks on this first album are just amazing. And so, I can't say enough good things about this record, and it doesn't get old. I can even trick myself into thinking, oh, I haven't really listened to that in a long time. I'm not really sure that if I want to. And if I listen to it, I'm like, oh, that was stupid. Of course I want to listen to this. So I kind of want to talk about what happened to Down Under, the controversy around that song.
Go ahead.
I kind of want to save it to the end.
Oh, you can save it to the end. That's fine.
Yeah, I kind of want to save it because I don't want to. That didn't happen until much later, and so I think when we're talking about Two Hearts and Beyond, we can talk about that. But I think it's infuriating and tragic what happened to this band because of a ridiculous claim. But we'll talk about that later. I don't know. Are we ranking these records?
Well, we might as well give it what would you give this out of 10?
I would give this one a 9.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, we're going to try to get through these 3 records, though. It's going to be interesting. But here in the Warehaus, we just let it go. The thing that I wanted to throw out before we jump, because Todd, you triggered a memory in my mind. Do you gentlemen remember back in the day when they said that Business as Usual and Cargo were recorded at the same time? Do you remember that rumor?
I do remember that rumor, and I don't think it's true.
It's not.
Is it true? I don't think it's true.
You have to admit,
because
these records sound. I think they sound identical.
I think they have different drum sounds.
Okay, go ahead, Paul. What?
The songs had been around. If you followed, I dove into these guys a lot when I was younger, stayed with it even after the fact. If you check out their live sets, they were playing their B-sides. I got a set list from 82 here, and half of it is B-sides. They're opening with I Can See It in Your Eyes. They're playing F-19. They're playing Shintario, which was written by Ron Stryker. That's something I'm going to get into when I talk about Business as Usual as the writing credits. That's going to be part of what happened, by the way.
Yeah.
So it's these songs have been around. Longest Night didn't get recorded until 98, even though Greg Ham wrote that way back in, I think, the late 70s, early 80s. Right. So no, these songs they had a pool of songs they were pulling from, and then the Cargo stuff was getting played. I know I liked, well, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I liked Who Off Cargo was
That's
getting
all
played on the Business as Usual tour. So no, these songs had been around, but they had to pick and choose A&R wise what made Business as Usual, what made Cargo.
God, this is such a great conversation. This is the same thing that happened to the Knack. All those songs on the first Knack album and the second Knack album, all those songs were what they played in the bars.
Yes.
Now, they just happened to choose those tracks for the first album, and they chose the second album, and that's the tracks they chose. It wasn't anything thought out. This is what we're doing. These songs fit together better. But the Little Girls Understand got just freaking panned. But these are all the same.
Which doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Typical United States ignorance or arrogance. It didn't get released here. We were the last ones to pick up on them. So it got released in November of 81 in Australia. It didn't get released here until April of 82. But by then, they were opening for Fleetwood Mac on the Mirage Tour. So they were huge by then. Western provinces of Canada were all over them. And suddenly here comes the U.S. going, oh, we love these guys. Let's put them number one for 15 weeks straight.
Right.
We were the last ones on board here.
But it's just interesting how this works. You know what I mean? So let's throw it over to Paul. Paul, give me your thoughts on that first album.
I get the feeling that Todd and I are going to be similar, but flipped between Business as Usual and Cargo.
Oh, okay. All right.
Track by track. Okay. Who can it be? I agree completely. Matter of fact, I'd say the first, this is going to almost sound indecisive. The first 7 songs, I don't slow down. Who could it be now? I Can See It in Your Eyes. They opened with I Can See It in Your Eyes on that tour back in 82. So that cooks immediately. You've got Greg playing both sax and keyboards live for their opening song. Incredible. He was their secret weapon all along.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was.
Underground, I mean, the singles speak for themselves, so I'm not going to say as much about them, at least for Business as Usual. Underground, Todd mentioned that song. My brother and I both, I remember when we bought this album, because he's 3 years older than me, so we were pooling our money to get albums back then. Underground, we beat that song to death. That could have been a single easily. Helpless Automaton, I hadn't heard anything like that one. So you want to talk new wave? That's the new wave sound that Men at Work had. But I agree completely that they defy one classification, because you've got reggae influence, which came out a little bit more on Cargo, which I love the Andy Summers comparison with Ron Streicher. That's excellent. I couldn't have articulated. I was trying the whole time we were getting ready for this. There's reggae in here. There's a teeny bit of ska. There's a lot of jazz and a lot of folk. So People Just Love to Play with Words was written by Ron Streicher, even though Colin sings it. Be Good Johnny was both Greg and Colin on the writing credits. Touching the Untouchables is both Ron and Colin on the writing credits. Down by the Sea, I'm glad you brought that up. These guys were a jam band. If you watch their live tours,
just about
83, Down by the Sea was this incredibly well drawn out, not lagging at all, this like 5 or 6 minute epic. They're all playing. Jerry Spicer is a machine on the drums. John Reese is tight on bass. You've got 5 excellent players. You've got 5 people singing. I might add another secret weapon, which will come into play when we get to Two Hearts. So these guys, all 5 of them are tight. They're excellent musicians. Ron Streicher is 4 years younger than the rest of them, which is something else that I think is going to affect them later on. But he's almost like Ron Streicher's almost like the Tommy Shaw is my comparison, because he's the young talent they bring in, and he's this melodic player who brings this young breath of energy in as well. And he's given them these songs, this extra voice that came out of nowhere. So I'm going to start getting the other albums. I don't want to do that.
No, it's all right. You're all right. Just
amazing.
Go with it. Whatever you want to say. It's all loose.
For now, Business as Usual, I'm going to give it an 8 because I want somewhere to go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
I want to
say, you mentioned that whole. You mentioned the whole police experience. this whole era, people don't really think about it so much, but Andy Summers and that Sound of the Police had a lot of influence. Look at Rush. Look at Alex Lifeson and how he adapted that and kind of took what Andy Summers laid out, but brought that into the whole Rush experience. You know that Neil Peart loves Stuart Copeland. In fact, they love the whole band. Look at Power Windows, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
There's Police all over that. They embrace that stuff. And you look at Men at Work, yeah, the Police are going to have that influence on that band. It's just incredible. And people don't really think about it, but Andy Summers, who was doing really anything that he was doing back then?
And Colin came from Scotland down to Australia, so he brought that European thing. So
big influence. It affected a lot of music. They really changed a lot of things.
And I mentioned earlier that I thought that this was kind of this album was kind of a hybrid between new wave and more mainstream music. And I think it's the jazz and the jam band and the folk that makes that happen. It kind of pushes it towards the mainstream just a little bit. Even though I think at their core they were a new wave band, they were so good that they kind of pushed it in a way that made everybody take notice rather than just being another new wave band. And I think you've got to give Colin Hay credit for, he could have been the kind of frontman that took control of everything, but he did not. From their debut album, he's got other writers. From the second album on, he lets them sing. I mean, he was not
for the first two albums. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, at the beginning.
Yes, at the beginning.
Happened.
Yes.
Well, I'm just curious, but that first record, I'm going to throw it. I know it's going to be hard for us to talk about these 3 albums in an hour, but this is such a great conversation. What do you think that first album brought to the United States that it took off? What do you think was happening in the music industry then? And why did this take off to become such a big record?
It was cleaner. It wasn't as synthesized. It wasn't as, you have 5 musicians with clean vocals, all these influences that Todd had mentioned very well, but it wasn't all that. It's new wave, but it's not steeped in synth, which is going to be a big problem later.
Well, that's going to date things.
Yes, it
depends
is.
on the sounds. If
Stay
it's the
tuned
Yamaha,
for 2 Hearts.
It's the Yamaha DX7, you're doomed. But this was a little bit early. But go ahead.
Right. But you've got very distinct and clean music. I mean, clean sounds, their instruments, their percussion. Like I said, everybody's on time. Everybody is, and even their live performances, they're playing everything, not the singles, but the album tracks. They're in a hurry. The album, Business as Usual, clocks in at 38 minutes, 10 songs. They're playing all the album tracks actually faster than they are on the albums. There's almost an ironic joke in there somewhere with Men at Work. They're playing fast. They've got a lot going on.
Yeah.
So,
and I wanted to say something too about the keyboards to bounce off of that. There's almost an art rock kind of influence on it. It almost, the way they do the synths on these 2 records is almost a little bit like Roxy Music, kind of a Rhett Davies, produced kind of a sound. It's real classy and refined, and you sometimes have to look for them. They don't smack you in the face. And so it's a very elegant production as far as the symphonic part of it is concerned. But
you agree that it doesn't date anything.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that the way it's done is it doesn't sound dated. It sounds appropriate for the arrangements.
All right. Well, I didn't know how I was going to handle this episode, but I think I'm just going to host and interject in between, because you guys are so all over it. You don't need me. I'm just going to keep things moving. So, all right. So, Todd, you gave it an 8?
I gave it a 9.
A 9. Okay. Yeah. Paul gave it an 8. All right, kids, there you go. Let's talk about Cargo. So Cargo came out like what, a year later? Was that
April of 83.
Yeah.
April of 83.
83. And like I said before, a lot of people thought that the first album and this album were recorded at the same time because of the tonality, the production. But
Same producer, Peter McKeon.
Mhm.
It was only a year for the United States, but it was 2 years for everywhere else.
but people don't recognize that. People don't understand that. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, let me throw it over to Todd and get his thoughts on Cargo
Okay.
that came out in 83.
Well, I wanted to mention something that you said earlier about how it sounded to you like these two records could have been recorded at the same time.
I can see
I'm
where
going to agree and disagree, but I agree with
where
you in
people
that
thought that.
the
But
consistency of the material would lends itself to that. It's possible when you hear that you think, oh, maybe it was. But the thing that I think is different is I think the rhythm section has a slightly smoother, less edgy sound to it on Cargo than it does on Business as Usual. And I also think on Business as Usual, you've got Greg Ham playing the saxophone on almost every track. And on Cargo, you don't. And in fact, people put down, I'm getting ahead of myself, but people put down Two Hearts because it only has saxophone on like one song.
Well,
Cargo's pretty much the same.
Two Hearts is a different animal.
Yeah. But anyway, so there's a difference there. There's a difference in the instrumentation. It's subtle. It's not a big difference, but it's subtle. But I think my issue with Cargo, like I said before, No Sign of Yesterday is fantastic. It's probably my favorite song. I probably like it a little bit better than Down by the Sea, but it's really hard to pick a favorite between those two. I think No Sign of Yesterday is absolutely spectacular. I think it's a perfect blend between new wave and prog rock and art rock and just mainstream rock. I think it's just one of the best executed songs of that style that I've ever heard. I can't give it any higher praise. But I feel like and another thing too, Overkill is also amazing. It's a fantastic track.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a mistake also. Very, very good. I feel like side 2 drops off a little bit. And that is the only reason why I think that Business as Usual is a better record. I think Highwire, Blue for You, and I Like To are not as, they're still good, but I don't think they're as awesome as Touching the Untouchables and Catch a Star. So for that reason, it's hard to, when you've already talked about Business as Usual, all the great things I said about that, you can also say about Cargo. But I think they're like this, like, and so I would
It's
give,
like part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, I would give Cargo an 8.5, but I just feel like I wouldn't call any of the songs filler, but I think there are a couple on side 2 that get close to being filler.
Well, I'll say this, Todd. I think you're right on track. Robert Christgau, who hates everything, which is a running joke, he gave it a B. All Music gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Rolling Stone gave it a 4. The reviews about this record are right up where you're in that sweet spot. So you're right there.
But that guy you mentioned, Christgau, he's the kind of guy. I mean, when you talk about people just getting it wrong, I mean, when we were talking about the knack,
right?
You can pin that on like 3 guys, and he's one of them. So those critics had way too much power back then.
Well, they had back then had enough power to change your whole career. And you know what? This is like a different discussion, but I don't think the critics now have that kind of power like they used to.
They don't.
People used to go to Cream. They used to go to Hit Parader. They'd go to Rolling Stone. They'd go to all these to find, because you had no way to really find out if something was good.
But
it might not have been on the radio, but you'd read these reviews and they had a lot more power. Now those days are gone,
And one of the things that happened is that every big city had a newspaper, and every big city newspaper had a music critic.
Right.
No, they don't have it. If they have a music review at all in a newspaper, they just get it. It's syndicated. They don't have anybody on staff who's a music critic.
It's a
And then
sad
that
world
started
we live in.
happening about 20 years ago when cities stopped having symphony orchestras. They stopped having music critics. They stopped having art critics. And so now critics don't have any power, which is probably good.
Well, it's probably good
Because I think those Rolling
there's
Stone
also
guys
no
had way
music
too much
industry.
power.
There are no labels anymore. There's no way to promote anything. You
Right.
can promote it on YouTube, but you're lucky if someone will see it. You can promote it on TikTok. Hopefully you're like a Justin Bieber and you're able to get it out there. But then
You're
again,
totally a DIY machine, right?
it's just
Yeah.
not the same. It's just, I'm old school. I know I'm going on a tangent, but we always do here.
I idol Cameron Crowe.
There you go. Same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry I derailed it, but this is
That's
what it's
okay.
about. All we're about on this channel is talking music, so it doesn't matter. So Todd, what did you give this record again?
I gave it 8.5.
8.5.
8.5.
That's damn good. Let's throw it over to Paul and get his thoughts on this record. God, I can hardly wait to get the 3 hearts. I'll give you that. Anyway, Paul, go ahead.
As I actually kind of guessed, we flipped. Cargo, I think, is the better album. Actually, we had 4 singles off this.
Right.
I remember the music videos to all 4 of them: to Dr. Heckle and Mr. Jive, Overkill, It's a Mistake, and High Wire. They didn't do as well, of course, in the US at least. Not as memorable, but as far as track listing goes, Dr. Heckle and Mr. Jive, they got to be this. You got to remember the way they shot videos from interviews. I remember them saying at first, since it was such a brand new thing, like for Down Under, it was them like, okay, we're going to point the camera here. Now everybody do something. So Jerry was juggling and 3 of them would pretend like they're digging in the sand, that kind of stuff. So by the time Cargo rolls around, they have a budget. So Dr. Heckle and Mr. Jive, they do this crazy sort of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type theatrical goofy video, which as a 10-year-old I ate up. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Overkill, we've already said that song has legs. It still carries over to this day. Used in Scrubs. Zach Braff uses Colin Hayes music wherever he can. Settle Down My Boy, Ron Streicher wrote that song, sings it. I love that song. Upstairs in My House, it's Ron Streicher and Colin Hay both wrote it. No Sign of Yesterday, you said everything there is to say about that. I love that song. It's a Mistake. I was my favorite for a very long time. High Wire, I always loved. Here's where Todd and I are just going to disagree. Blue for You is probably now my favorite non-single on the album. The reggae behind that song, the live version, incredible. I love that song. I don't know what it is. It still holds up for me. It holds up and stands out for me. It's a song I can relate to as much at this age as I could at that age. Having a crush on someone at a young age as opposed to pining for someone at this age now, that song still resonates for me. And I can't say that about most songs I heard at that age. So there's something to be said for a song that can still, the writing still affects me. It may feel a little different, but a song that still resonates with me at this age, that's impressive to me. I Like To is sort of like the Help Us Out of Maiden of this album. Ron wrote it, Greg sings it. It's sort of like their dip back into the new wave pool. I think I like Help Us Out of Maiden more, but I Like To is still real good. It's their, like, let's stay edgy, new wavy. No Restrictions, fantastic song, great closer. To me, this album is the 9. So, like I said, we flipped. To me, this is an improvement. Wow. This is an improvement on Business as Usual in almost every way. The only thing that it's not is a debut album, in my opinion. They improved in almost everything.
So they avoided the sophomore slump.
Big time.
Oh, they definitely did that.
Oh,
yeah.
They definitely did. Well, we've known enough records that a lot of these bands don't avoid that. They just fall
I can make this a 10. If they would have ditched probably I Like To and put The Longest Night, because that was in their arsenal by then, and
Right.
it didn't get recorded until Brazil in 97, 98, whatever that was, 96, 97, 98.
Yeah.
If they would have picked one different song. So maybe either pulled I Like To or maybe Upstairs in My House and put The Longest Night on here, this album would have been a 10.
Wow.
And an interesting thing too about these two albums is that they're, in one way, they're kind of perfect, that they're just under 40 minutes or just, right around 40 minutes and 5 songs on each side. But in another way, that's really safe. And part of me wants to say it's good that they did that. But the other part of me wants to say Cargo could have been longer. But I don't think they wanted to mess with that because they knew it worked.
It is of the time.
Yeah.
Don't forget, CD technology in 83, it was still in that infancy. They never thought about that. CD technology really ruined a lot of
Well, and
things.
you will hear me talk at other times about how the increased length messed things up.
Right.
By the time you get to 1992 and records are like 101 minutes long, then you're just like, whoa, go back to the 40-minute record.
And I like CDs. Don't get me wrong. If anybody's following this channel, I'm into it. But there's no reason you have to use the entire media.
These two records are perfect examples of how you don't have to do that.
Exactly. The perfect record's 42 minutes long, as far as I'm concerned.
It's on one side of a C90.
Yes, it all goes back to the cassette tape. Excellent review, gentlemen. Of course, we always go on a tangent. Let's look at Two Hearts from 1985. Now, this is where things really change, because if anybody knows this record, it does not sound like it Men at Work at all. And I always thought, I remember when this came out, I was looking forward to the next thing. 1985, 2-year break, nothing. But when this came out and I heard it, I went, what the hell happened? So we're going to figure that out tonight. So I'm going to throw it over to Todd Evans and give me his thoughts on it and his rating. But Todd,
okay,
let's talk about Two Hearts and what's your thoughts on it?
I'm going to start out being positive.
Okay.
Because what happened when this record came out? The first thing you heard was the lead single, Everything I Need.
Mm-hmm.
Really nothing wrong with that. There really isn't.
There isn't?
I think Man with Two Hearts is an okay opener. I've always thought that Giving Up, sung by Greg Ham and written by Greg Ham, is a good song. When this record came out, that was my favorite song on it. Melodically, it's a very good song. And then you got Everything I Need after that. And Sail to You, what's written by Ron Streicher, is also kind of good. I think Children on Parade is supposed to be the No Sign of Yesterday or the Down by the Sea of this record. And I think it fails pretty much on all levels to do that. And then I think that this record we're going to talk about what's wrong with how it sounds in a minute, but I'm just kind of going through the songs.
Okay.
I'm
good now. I'm good now.
To say about how it sounds.
Go ahead.
But I think what happens is I think Maria is a terrible single. I think that there's only, and this is just my personal opinion and it's very biased, but I think that there's one band that does songs that are based on girls' names and does it well, and that's Toto. And every other band that tries to do that, I hate it. And if I see a song that's a girl's name, I think, what a lazy thing to do. And so Maria didn't have a chance with me.
You are so right, Todd. You are so right.
I don't think that Maria is a good song. I don't think it's memorable. I thought it was a terrible single. And I think that the record was dead in the water by the time they chose that as a single. I think Stay at Home, Hard Luck Story, Snakes and Ladders, and Still Life are all terrible. All of a sudden, you've got Greg Ham singing so much, and the songs are not even good enough for him. They're not good enough for him to sing. And so what ends up happening is you get halfway through that second side, which it was 2 sides. I mean, when I bought this It was a record.
It still was two-sided. It still is.
You're thinking, what is this? And that's when it really sets in how terrible this record sounds. I think it's probably mostly programmed odd because the people that they replaced the rhythm section with were good players, but I think that it sounds lifeless and the drums sound fake, and it just I'm not a person that hates that sound, that 80s sound, but in this case I do.
Well, I'll just say this, Todd.
I think that's not the kind of band they were.
Right,
and you
but
have
if
to wait
it was
till the 9th track to hear Greg play the saxophone. I mean, I could go on and on with the things that are wrong about this record, but
if it would have been executed correctly.
yeah,
But
they got
think
off
it
on the
was
right foot.
I don't know if they did.
I mean,
I think it's such a drastic change. People were used to those first two records and they knew what Men at Work sounded like. This doesn't sound like Men at Work.
Well, the thing about it is, okay, so I think this is probably the time to start talking about what happened. So the rhythm section decided that they didn't like Russell Depler, their manager. Yeah. And I mean, and this was the kind of manager that was, you know, if you look at the liner notes to Cargo, he's listed as a band member. It's like everything they did do, and the sixth guy is Russell Depler.
It's like Jefferson Holt.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Am I
like
right?
The bad Jefferson Holt, yes. And so I think that from what I can gather, there's not a lot of, I mean, there might be some really deep details in there that you can get to if you know where to look. But what I can gather is that they didn't think that he was managing the tours right. And they didn't think that he had it was Jerry Spicer said that Russell was good for hustling gigs in Melbourne and Sydney, but once the band became international, he had no idea what he was doing.
Well, I hate to interrupt, but we're having a conversation. It probably was more than what he could handle. That's probably a fair assessment.
He was Colin's friend.
Right.
It was too much. They took off like a rocket, and he couldn't handle it. I get it.
And this is where it gets, I mean, it's just a series of unfortunate events. Hopefully that's not a trademarked phrase.
No,
but
you're right.
I mean, the bass player and the drummer got, you know, mad and they turned on Depler, who was Colin Hay's friend. Colin Hay couldn't see their side because he just defended his friend, and that was it. And Russell Depler didn't do anything to keep the band together. He just decided rhythm sections are not they're expendable.
And that's totally
session players and
thinking.
You know, technology, and we'll just replace them. Not for Men at Work. You don't take that rhythm section out.
Right.
So, and Colin Hay even says later, I really wish Depler would have done something I wish Russell would have done something to keep them from leaving. And that could have happened. But they should have seen that coming. And then you get to where when Ron Strykert finds out about this, and he's like, I don't like this. This feels wrong to me. And he's younger. And so he's going on a gut feeling. He's not thinking business. He's thinking for Jerry and I'm sorry, what's the bass player's name?
John Reese.
Yeah, John Reese. He's like, this feels wrong. I don't like this. And then, you know, what happens? He's got that in his head. Nobody's talking to him. Nobody's helping him through it. And so he gets through, you know, 9/10 of the way through the 200 sessions. And he goes, I'm going home.
Yeah.
And nobody stops him. Colin Hay just says, are you coming back? And he says, I don't think so. I mean, the whole thing is just one bad thing after another, and nobody steps back. And it's because it all happens so fast. They couldn't handle it. Yeah. Not one person involved steps back and says, whoa, hey, hang on a sec.
Whoa.
Not even in a cynical way. Not even in a way to say, hey, you know what? This is really a cash cow. We should keep this going. Nobody even did that. They just thought, oh, well, we can keep it going. We'll just make it happen. Men at Work is what we say it is.
Well, think about it.
That's where you get two hearts.
But you're right, though. the combination of all those guys together was magic.
Yeah.
You take out something from the recipe and it's going to fall apart. This is what you get with Two Hearts.
Now, you could have replaced them, not with technology, but with people, and you still would have had Colin Hay, Greg Ham, and Ron Stryker. And they could have saved that, but they didn't.
I just find it fascinating. I just don't know why.
That because the music,
Go
the
ahead,
vocal
Paul.
on Two Hearts, it's Colin backing Colin backing Colin. It's Greg backing Greg backing Greg. All the other songs, live or in studio, when it's harmony, there's harmony.
It's all of them, right?
None of that. There's no punch to any of these songs. So you mentioned the instrumentation as well. It's two guys in a computer.
Yeah.
But I would think, you would just think that they could see beyond that. We know what worked before. I just don't get it. Because I can't think of another record that is so dramatically different than what came before in such a short period of time.
And here's another thing, produced by Colin Hay and Greg Ham. Why was that okay with Columbia?
Thank you.
Why did Columbia let that happen?
Because at that point they were making money and they went, okay, all right, you guys seem to know what you're doing, so go ahead.
Cargo produced by Peter McKeon. Two Hearts, Colin Hay and Greg Ham.
Mm-hmm.
They were listening to the top 40 charts, evidently.
Well, here's another thing too. I mean, they replaced the rhythm section with these two guys, Alsop and Kennedy. But later on, the drummer Kennedy was replaced by Chad Wackerman from Frank Zappa's band. Why didn't they make this record with Chad Wackerman?
I know he's a great drummer. I don't know.
I mean, he made his first solo album with Chad Wackerman, and it is a good record, but they could have done it. They had the talent to do it, and it didn't.
Let me throw this out there to you guys. Let's say you have the tracks from Two Hearts, all the songs. Let's say you give them Cargo production, business as usual production. Are there songs here or are there no songs here?
I think you're okay with 5 of them.
Thank you. It was a
5 years.
So what do you think happened with the songwriting? You think it's because of all the upheaval, all the drama, these guys couldn't focus and write songs? Let me ask you this. Were any of these songs on Two Hearts from an earlier era?
That I don't know. Do you know,
Paul, do you know?
2 of them. Everything I Need was older, and no, only one of them. Everything I Need was older,
and that's one of the good ones.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't even want to do a song by song breakdown. I really don't need to be honest.
You don't have to.
The only thing I'll say is that for starters, I agree with everything about Two Hearts that Todd said, except I'm going to be even more merciless about it. I think the entire thing is washed out sounding. It's way too reverby.
Yeah.
I already said what I said.
80s. It's 1986. It's 1985.
I do think Still Life is salvageable as a song. What's one we kind of disagree on? My favorite line, valedictorian.
I think it's too short.
Yeah. I think it's got the same dark, feel that Overkill did, where they could. I think that's one of the 5 you could salvage.
I think I agree with that.
But there's an entire group of B-sides that they never recorded. I told you, Longest Night, that definitely should have made it on a Men at Work album, an official 5-person album that never did. F-19 was on the B-side. I wrote a couple of them down. Shintario, which was a Ron Stryker song, that never made it. Mr. Entertainer never made it onto an album. Or some other B-sides. Yeah, they were playing Longest Night in 82 and 83. There's no excuse. They had the songs. So what I think is, as people were peeling off, as you perfectly described, and that was happening, I think they decided, we're going to, with this new, we can still do this. And I think they just wrote stuff. I think they were,
you didn't write Men at Work songs.
They were not Men at Work songs.
they were not writing for the 5 of them anymore, and they went, I have a great idea. Since this is our sound, I'm going to write this song for this sound, and it didn't work.
So you think it's all ego?
Yes.
Probably.
Ego due to a lack of the ability, because they all agree. That's the one thing they agree on, and Todd already covered it. In all the interviews, they all said they didn't know how to communicate. Jerry Spicer said it. Colin Hayes said it. And someone else did. Might have been Greg Ham. But and then even later on when they, and not even, I'm not talking about the Down Under legal problems. There were some other legal problems that came up.
Right.
Yes.
Later.
Those are
Yeah.
even scarier.
Well, we can talk about that.
I feel bad about that one. I feel very bad about that one.
Yeah.
But just these guys did not know how to communicate at all.
So Paul, since we're talking to you at the moment, what would you rate this out of 10?
2 hearts?
Yeah.
2.
2?
2.
I'm going to be kinder and say
Paul,
5.
I mean, all right, Paul, 2. I think that's fair. I mean, if you look at the rating, All Music gave it a 2 out of 5. You're giving it a 2 out of 10.
I'm not going to argue
Giving it
against
a 1
Paul's 2.
out of 5. What would you give it, Todd?
5.
You give it 5.
I give it a 5. I think Giving Up, Everything I Need, and Sail to You are pretty good songs.
But the production doesn't kill it
if they
for
would
you?
have made an album, I would have been okay. This isn't anywhere near as good as because of the production, but
Mhm.
if it didn't fall apart on the second half, I mean, and I think it's Still Life kind of saves it a little bit, but it mostly just falls apart. Snakes and Ladders is interesting, and it's the only song that has saxophone on it. So, but Maria, Stay at Home, and Hard Luck Story they should have been on the cutting room floor. I was looking at this thing, and there's a review from Stephen Thomas Erlewine, which I always think of one of those guys that you can blame for getting almost everything wrong. So he's right on
allmusic.com.
Yeah, he says it's a bland synthesized variation on mainstream pop featuring none of the melodic sensibilities or subtle humor of the first 2 albums. And that's what it is. There's no humor. It's not that those first 2 albums are funny, but there's something
humor
about them. There's a humor about them. They're feel good records.
You listen to those
clever
first 2 records, and it sounds like they don't take themselves seriously. They're like, here we are, we're cranking out these songs, blah blah blah. But you get to this record, you get to 2 Hearts, and there's no joy. They take themselves seriously. It's like night and day. And I think that might be it. But still, Men at Work with a Drum Machine and Yamaha DX7s doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I saw Men at Work in 97 in California at the House of Blues. And it was basically a Colin Hay show. And then the second half of it, Greg Ham came out.
On the second half?
As Men at Work. The show I saw was like that.
Oh,
I saw 99 or 2000.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
The show
That
I
is
saw
sad.
in 97 was like that. And it was Men at Work. It was billed as Men at Work, but Colin was on stage by himself part of the time. And some of the time it was just him and Greg. And then a rhythm section came out and they played the hits. And it was pretty good.
yeah.
And I think that there was potential for that to turn into something. But I think he really needed to get Ron Strykert, and Ron Strykert was not in any position. He was having a tough time. He was homeless for a couple of years. And
he was. I didn't know that.
yeah. And so it's really interesting when you look at the lineup changes between 96 and 2002. It's just all over the place. Somebody from the Hoodoo Gurus was in it. Somebody from Boom Crash Opera was in it. I mean, and it's just...
The 2000 lineup was tight. I saw them in House of Blues in Chicago. That was a fantastic show. I was on the rail, happy as hell. It was musically, it was an amazing show. And I mean, Greg was on. It was fantastic. But that being said, you still missed Ron. I remember during It's a Mistake, as a matter of fact, thinking it ain't Ron. Like, they sounded great, don't get me wrong, but there was the whimsy wasn't there, and that melodic whatever it was that Ron brought to it wasn't there.
I
It
always
was
hope,
the magic combination between all of them.
yes.
You take something out of the recipe, you're
Yes.
going to.
And they had technically proficient bassist and drummer playing. I couldn't tell you who, but it
Yeah.
wasn't Jerry and John. It wasn't. You just
But
knew.
look at all these bands that really make it. It's because there's a certain combination that's magical. Men at Work had it. Somehow it got all messed up, as we talked about. And, you only have some of the parts.
Agreed completely.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like Men at Work, but yeah, it kind of doesn't.
I always hoped that because of Colin Hayes' first solo album, Looking for Jack, which I really liked,
Which is
and the
great. I've
participation
got that
of
on
Chad
vinyl.
Wackerman
I got
drums,
it
I
on
always
vinyl.
hoped that they would put it together with Wackerman and another bass player and Ron Stryker, and that there would be another Men at Work album, and then there wasn't. He didn't. So,
Well, all I'm going to say is based on this conversation, all anyone needs are those first two records. Business as Usual and Cargo, and then you're good.
but I'm such a completist. I have to go.
I know.
Even though I do this with a lot of bands, even though I get great advice to stay away from certain things, I can't do it. I can't stay away.
Let me ask you gentlemen this while we're here. If someone's looking to get into Men at Work, do you think that based on their catalog that maybe all they need is a best of, a greatest hits?
No.
Well,
Or do
there's
you
a really
think
good
there's-
best stuff called Contraband, and I mean,
talk
I
about
think
that.
maybe you could do that, but I think that those two albums are so short that you might as well just buy them both.
And get a hold, go to YouTube, get a hold of 1983 Live at San Francisco, or is it Berkeley? That concert is an absolute on its own entity. You must watch that concert.
Why has that not been like a record store day release?
That needs to be a record store.
The recordings are out there.
That is an
Would be a great
Lord,
way
they're
to
running out of
bring them back. It would be to get a live, something good live from that time.
There's a 10 out of 10 concert.
And I
Yeah.
always hear people bitching about Record Store Day that they're running out of stuff. They're like scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Well,
Why
here's
don't
something for them.
show out?
They're tight. They never miss a note. They're playing God knows how many instruments all at the same time. Watch Jerry's playing. How many instruments Greg goes through per song. All five of them sing in harmony. They've got AV things going on. They're in character. The crowd, we talked, it was funny during the Kilroy conversation. You have all ages crowd there. You don't see concerts like that.
Yeah. I remember I used to like to record things off the radio, like FM radio concerts.
Oh, I
remember
did that all the
having
time.
At least a couple of those.
Tom
and
Petty,
thinking they were
Trick.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah, like King Biscuit flat. Well, what was before King Biscuit? Oh, Todd, you remember back in the day? All right, I'm gonna throw this out to you. I know we're on a tangent. Utopia, the Halloween concert from 19. I think it was the Face the Music tour, 1980, but they played it on the radio. I recorded it.
Me too.
Later it came out as a Japanese import. And that's the one that's got One World on it with different lyrics.
Yeah, there used to be. I'm trying to think of the names of the other shows. I mean, there was Rockline. There were a lot of there were a lot of conversation ones. There was a bunch of them. I didn't prep for that, but we could talk about.
I know, but that's like
they're not
a
coming to
different
my
show.
head right now. But
cool radio shows from back in the day that when you were a kid you used to record.
Oh yeah,
and but you remember it was like an event. Okay, I can't go out and like play hide and seek tonight because they're doing a Tom Petty show on whatever radio station and I have to be home and record it.
One just popped in my head. Was there one called Off the Record with Mary Turner?
I think so.
Why did that pop into my head? Is that a thing?
Off the Record. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of shows like that. And I used to record all of them, whether they were conversation or live recordings.
Yeah, I was the same way.
Oh,
God darn it. And I would play those things all the time. It was like
I
gold.
wanted to mention really quick. I wanted to mention the lawsuit. And
yes, go ahead.
And what that did to Greg Ham. I think this music publishing company who bought a catalog of songs, and one of them was a song called Kookaburra. and it's basically a nursery rhyme. It's a kid's song. Well, this music company apparently on a TV show, like on a game show, a TV quiz show. It is called Spicks and Specks. They were talking, there was a conversation. They posed a question about how Down Under sounded like Kookaburra. And this company, Larrikin Music Publishing, heard that and thought, hey, we should sue. This is the most ridiculous lawsuit I've ever heard in my life. Now, I always think that whenever anybody tries to sue somebody for copying a tune, that first of all, it's a crappy thing to do. And second of all, it's usually, so this is me being on my soapbox. Not only is that, but it's usually a reach, okay? And this is a reach. If you listen to this kid song, Kookaburra, you can hear what somebody may have heard about Greg's saxophone solo in the melody of that song, but the melody of that song is so basic that you could probably accuse dozens or hundreds of other people of copying it. So the fact that that affected Greg Ham so much, and he said he did not want his legacy to be somebody who stole someone else's song, it's tragic. And I think the people that did it should be ashamed of themselves. And it makes me very upset when I think about it, because it's stupid. They never should have done that. That's my
No, it's horrible. It's horrible. But what do you think about My Sweet Lord and He's So Fine?
I think it's a terrible thing to do. I think it's a terrible thing to do, to accuse George Harrison of ripping off that song. It's probably a coincidence. I think
but there's only so many chord progressions. There's
Right.
only so many different keys. But if you listen to a lot of these songs, there's so many different chord progressions. Well, no, there's a lot of songs that have the same, 1, 4, 5 or whatever over and over again. But they somehow change it up for, the melody or whatever.
If you play Knock on Heaven's Door enough times, you can pull songs out of that. We used to make it a drinking game.
Oh, and people talk about Led Zeppelin. I'm not going to go into that because I can't remember the details of all of that.
Know,
but
we're on a tangent.
Led Zeppelin didn't make something original. You're an idiot.
The thing is, though, that Greg Ham was so affected by this that he took his own life. I mean, didn't he he became a heroin addict?
Yeah.
It just affected him.
Officially he died of a heart attack, but it did something
he was doing. It totally changed his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
It killed him. He couldn't handle it. He was like such a purist, a true musician, that the last thing he'd want to do is copy something.
Well, he felt responsible for bringing the band down because he was like, that was my idea. This song was already written and I added that. And because I added that, now all of this is happening.
Now, and the only thing I'll say
about the legacy.
His name wasn't even on the writing credits, so you can only convince someone. That's a very slippery slope. You got to be careful there. I agree completely with what you said, but if he takes that on himself, no one's going to convince him of otherwise. And I'm sure there were people who were trying to convince him of otherwise. Mm-hmm. So while I agree with every word you said, there's only so much you can say. So I agree. It's a complete tragedy.
There's that too.
But that being said, try and convince someone up is down, and it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's bullshit, and I agree. So,
well, this kind of brought me down.
Well, that's the thing that would keep it from happening now. I mean, everybody's older, but you can still hope that these guys would go, hey, you know what? We didn't communicate very well and we ruined this. Let's try and fix it. And now you can't. Now you can't fix it. Because
time is an ally to some degree, because after a while you give it some time and people won't remember that. Yeah, we're bringing it back up, and now we've just screwed everything up.
Well, that would have been really good advice to give Greg Ham, and somebody probably did give him that advice, but unfortunately, we can't do it now.
Horse to water. To water.
But everybody's wired differently, and certain things affect us differently. Greg's obviously was very sensitive. Colin, not so much. I'm just saying, but.
And so I saw Colin.
Maybe not so much. Of course, Ron became homeless, so maybe he was affected.
Ron bounced back. I wanted to say Ron bounced back and made a record, I think in 2002.
And a solo album. Yeah.
So anyway, oh my God, what a great discussion, gentlemen. This is why we do this here on the Warehouse. It's all about the music. It's all about the discussion. So based on what I've learned from these two gentlemen who are true professionals, for God's sakes, just pretty much stick to those first two records, even though Todd he's a completist.
I wouldn't suggest anybody else buy that third album like I did.
Yeah.
Unless you
need it.
Gear, yes.
If you need it in the collection, go ahead and find it. But the first two records are classics. Get them. Holy crap. Who's talking Men at Work? Well, hell, we are. So if you're into it, check it out. We hope you well, that's all we're talking. The reason we're talking music is just so you go out and check it out. So go out and check Men at Work. And
that concert. Go check that concert out.
Check the concert out. All right. Well, we can sign this dog off. I want to thank Paul Simon and Todd Evans for this discussion on Men at Work. What a great topic. And like I said before, I keep repeating myself, but we try to talk about those bands no one's talking to. I'm never going to set YouTube on fire, but thank God someone's talking to Men at Work, and these two gentlemen were here to do it. So I want to thank you both for coming on. And this has to be fun. One of the best discussions we've had in a long time. Gilroy was here, which is down in the link. You can find it. That darn near broke the internet. But this might structurally harm it forever. So anyway, I want to thank Paul. And I want to thank Todd Evans for coming on. Thanks for the discussion. Oh, I can hardly wait for the next one. So please subscribe if you like what you see. Check it out. And also, I want to say one thing. Every Wednesday on the Contrarians, we are live. And I'm going to try to get this up quickly. Well, I don't know if I'll get it up by Wednesday. I won't. But please tune in every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on the Contrarians, where we have a live discussion. Well, lately, we've been talking album covers. It'll probably change eventually. But I do know that there's a special guest coming up, and hopefully I can get this up, but you never know. Anyway, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Todd. We will do this again. And thanks, everybody. Please leave a comment. What do you think about these Men at Work records? What do you think about that third record? I really want to know. All right, everybody. We'll see you, and have a good one.